welcome back again this week to our weekly discussion on the Bhagavad Gita. And as we do always, and I try to remember to mention every week, if you have questions, please send them in and we'll write them on the board, and I hope to be able to get to them. This week's reading on the Bhagavad Gita is a very famous reading, and I saved it from last week so that we could address it in a little bit more depth this week. And this is from the beginning of chapter 4. And I'm sure all of you have heard this reading many times because it's often quoted. And let's explore it. This is from the 4th chapter, 7 and 8 stanza. O Bharata, meaning Arjuna, whenever virtue or dharma declines, and a dharma is in the ascendant, I incarnate myself on earth, appearing from age to age in visible form. I come to destroy evil and to reestablish virtue. We're going to talk a little bit about that one, and perhaps about one or two other stanzas that follow it, and a little bit and have a relationship to it. What is being described here is a very ancient tradition, very common in the East, in India particularly, but also elsewhere, that the divine incarnates, takes human form in this world, and guides mankind in times of difficulty, times of trial, or as the Gita says, when adharma, evil or discord predominates, God incarnates again and again. And in the East, in India, this is particular incarnations are identified and generally believed in. Krishna obviously being one here from the Bhagavad Gita, but also Rama and sometimes Buddha, and there are others as well. And there's even Kalki coming in the future, is predicted to be a future incarnation. But Krishna says in this very stanza, or in the stanzas preceding it, which we explored last week, he says, many times have I descended, coming again and again, that I know my past lives. I taught these teachings to Manu, Vivaswat in the past, and other great rishis in the past. And by implication, I would read that if he came many times in the past, the chances are, could you give me a glass of water? The chances are also many times he will come again in the future. That's the natural implication that we see there. We find also that in other traditions outside of India, we find that in the West, of course, they speak of God descending, taking form. This is in Christianity, is central to that is Jesus Christ. He's the Son of God. Now, what do we find sometimes common in many different traditions is that those incarnations are very particular. These are, you might say, limited to these particular personalities. Krishna, Rama, Buddha, those were the incarnations of God. Perhaps not others are recognized. And of course, in the West, Christianity speaks to Jesus Christ as the only Son of God. Well, Paramahansa Yogananda explained this concept of what is an avatar, and I'd like to go over that a little bit this evening. It really is quite a mystery. Why would God incarnate? Why does God take form? Does he take form? Well, as Yogananda explained it, the tradition of the avatar needs to be understood in its broader meaning. All of us are seeking our ultimate destiny in union with God. Many are the souls that have gone before us, and many are the souls that will follow. And some of those souls, incarnation after incarnation, finally, through their efforts and through God's grace, through attunement with the divine, have achieved and found that goal of freedom in God. Those souls that find their freedom in God ultimately are released from the necessity to incarnate again. But some souls return again and sometimes again, not by any imperative of karma from the past of their own, but by to play a role by, you might say, God's will. And in our tradition of self-realization, of course, Paramahansa Yogananda said he had found God long ago, as he put it. He said, I killed Yogananda long ago, meaning that I killed any sense of ego identification. And so was the same for Krishna. Many lifetimes ago, he had revealed these teachings before that incarnation in Krishna. It wasn't, I don't think it's proper to say that it was Krishna was those previous incarnations, because Krishna was identified, you could say we identify Krishna as that particular incarnation that took form at the time of the tale of the Bhagavad GIta, the Mahabharata. But it was God who took that form and that soul that had attained freedom in God that returned as a free soul again and again and again, as Krishna explains, and probably will take form again in the future. And as our tradition of self-realization says, that Paramahansa Yogananda said that in this age, that Babaji is an incarnation of Lord Krishna in this age, fulfilling that promise to once again and again take form when Adharma rules and there's a need, virtue declines. Now, I think that's a poetic way of saying it, because there are many times when outwardly we can't necessarily say that Adharma is in the ascendant and God only takes form at those times. But an avatar comes usually with a certain mission. There's a purpose to it. The purpose is, you might say, it's for a godly purpose, that God takes form to once again and again to reawaken spirituality, to reawaken the quest for God in people's hearts. Paramahansa Yogananda and the gurus of our line of self-realization, they came at the beginning of what Sri Yukteswar said is a modern beginning of Dwapara Yuga. And after many incarnations, or many centuries and millennia even, of the world being in a darkened age, as we explored last week when we discussed yugas, we've come out of that dark age and moved into a new age of Dwapara Yuga. And it would be appropriate in the larger scheme of things to be able to express these ancient teachings of Sanatana Dharma, not as a new religion, as Swami Kriyananda asked his guru when he said, is this a new religion, sir, that you have brought these teachings of self-realization and these techniques of Kriya Yoga and this modern expression? And Paramahansa Yogananda said, no, it's not a new religion, but it's a new expression. And in every age, as times change, as this world evolves, as society moves forward from one age to another, the cultural context needs again and again for these ancient teachings to once again be expressed in a new way, in a fresh expression that is able to meet the needs of culture at that particular time. And so in the time of Krishna, 2,000-3,000 years ago, these teachings were expressed through the Bhagavad Gita. And now again, in this age, these very same teachings of the Gita are being reawakened again. Remember, as we mentioned last time in our last class, when Krishna was speaking, he was speaking at the ending phase of Dwapara Yuga. And now here we are, some 2,500, almost 3,000 perhaps years later, in the ascending phase of Dwapara Yuga. And Paramahansa Yogananda made it a central point of his mission of reawakening these ancient teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, showing the similarities between the original yoga as taught by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita and the original teachings of Christianity as taught by Jesus Christ. Now in the West, Jesus Christ is recognized, although the language is slightly different, as an avatar. In other words, an incarnation of God. But of course, in the West, the pious belief is, yes, he was an incarnation of God, but he was the one and only incarnation of God. Now, interestingly, Paramahansa Yogananda said, though common belief, the pious belief that he was the one and only, of course it doesn't make sense. We see this world has, is ancient. Mankind itself is ancient and has a great future ahead of itself. But this planet and this solar system is only one out of countless solar systems in this universe. How vast, millions and millions, billions, trillions perhaps, of stars and planets, galaxies seemingly endless. Certainly there must be other awakened conscious beings somewhere else in this universe. Paramahansa Yogananda said that was so. He said there are many places for souls to go. And when a soul dies on this planet, it's often reincarnated here again to work out certain karma. But he says it's not usually the case that they always come back here. He said there are many planets to go to work out one's karma. And actually once he even said, somewhat jokingly, but probably truthfully as well, he said if they came back again and again to the same place, they'd catch on too quickly. And I thought that was quite a nice way to put it. But he said there are many places to go, and not only this universe of the material world, but also there are astral universes as well. So it would be ridiculous to think in terms of there could be one human incarnation, one small speck of time that would be the one and only reflection of God. But what Yogananda did say is in that phrase of Jesus Christ being the only reflection of God, is actually there's a certain truth embodied in that statement. But he wasn't speaking of the personality of Christ. He was speaking of the Son of God aspect of Christ, the one reflection, the Christ consciousness, or as you would say in the East, the Krishna consciousness, that consciousness that is a reflection of God within each one of us. He, Christ in this case, embodied, and it was a material reflection, and within him was alive that pure reflection of the divine was living within him. And he had come through that statement. Paramahansa Yogananda says he gave indication that he had come as an avatar. He had come as a liberated soul. Paramahansa Yogananda made another interesting statement about the Western tradition. He said Moses, many centuries prior to Christ, also came as a liberated master. Now, he didn't say specifically as an avatar, but he said Moses was a great liberated master. So this would make sense that through all cultures, East, West, other cultures besides those I just mentioned, God would take form in the presence, in the embodiment of souls who have gone before and have risen up through the struggle on their own of attaining divine freedom, working out all past karma, and being free in God. Now, it's said that most souls who attain that state of freedom, total liberation, don't return. They're one with God to remain always in the bosom of the Lord. But some do return. And the mystery of why one would return and one not return, I think this is something that we just have to leave to the divine. And it's like asking God, why did we create this universe? Why did you create this world? Naturally, the human mind wants to speculate, and our philosophical nature is to ask that question, but sometimes these answers will remain hidden from us. And the best answer, as Paramahansa Yogananda said, is find God, ask him, and all will be revealed. And I think that's many of the questions that I have in life. I think, well, I'm just going to have to find God and ask him, and he will let me know. But this mystery of the avatar, I call it a mystery because it is very much a mystery when we begin to think of it. Why would God incarnate? Why would it take form? After all, this world has been created. We're all on this path to find freedom. And if you think in terms of time, we have incarnations ahead of us to take as much time as we need to find God. But they say the Lord incarnates and takes form to help mankind. God intercedes in the affairs of souls on this earth. This is what's spoken to by the great masters, that God actually does participate in this way. But why? Because if time, you could almost say time is infinite. I mean, we have plenty of time. We have days of Brahma ahead of us. Sooner or later, you would think that the souls will find their way back to God. But why does God want to hasten the process? After all, He created this universe to enjoy it. Why hasten it? And why not let it drag out? And this, I don't know the answer to this, but I've speculated on it. These are the types of things I think about. And I suspect that it's simply God's nature. This is how this universe is created. Swami Kriyananda is often answered in this way when asked the question of why did God create this universe. And you might apply this also to why an avatar. Is that it's God's nature is bliss. God is bliss. Ananda is one of the qualities of God. His bliss, His joy. And the very nature of bliss is to expand. It's just what bliss is. It's expansion. The very nature of God is also love. Swami Kriyananda defined love as bliss in motion. In that motion is an expansiveness. In the very nature, it's the very nature of bliss and love to expand and to include others. If one finds this joy, a master finds this joy, God is bliss. He wants to include others. And so the impulse, you might say God can't help it. It's the very impulse of the nature of God to expand, to include others, and to reach down to help those souls that are of His own nature. He's created all of this, and so it's His nature to help bring them up. And you could say, if He didn't do that, would souls really be able to attain freedom if God didn't intercede in some fashion? Now, some people believe that God created this universe. You could say this is called, in philosophy, this is called deism. God created this universe, set it in motion like a clockwork, you might say. Set it in motion and then let it go. And then watched it evolve. And many people, their approach to the divine is in this form of deistic thought, that God certainly manifests. This is a godly universe, but God doesn't participate in this creation. Well, the avatar and the mystery of the avatar and the belief in the avatar counters that belief. It says, yes, God does participate. He reaches down. And without that, this process of each individual soul finding freedom might not take place. I read the Mahabharata. The Bhagavad GIta is but a part of the Mahabharata, and part of the larger story, for those of you who know it, and I'm sure many of you do, is that the battle that takes place, that is the setting of the Bhagavad Gita, this battle ultimately is won by the Pandavas, the forces of virtue, or the forces of our own higher nature, over the forces of the Kauravas, which is those of our lower natures. But if you remember from the story, at many critical points in the story, Krishna, who has promised not to fight in this battle, nevertheless, he intervenes very subtly in the battle. And his intervention is such that it brings about the victory of the Pandavas at critical times in the battle. And at the end of the battle, he tells the Pandavas, you would never have been able to be victorious had not I interceded. Because they're questioning him, why did you do this? Why did you intercede? He said, you would have never won had it not been for me interceding. And so it is, I think, for the same for us. In this battle between the forces of good and bad, the necessity for the divine to intercede in our personal life is essential. But in the same way, a scripture applies not just for what's going on within ourselves, the scripture is also outwardly interpreted as well. And so the avatar comes to intercede in the course of human affairs to help mankind move in a certain spiritual direction. We see this expressed in the autobiography of a yogi, where in that chapter about Babaji in the Himalayas, Paramahansa Yogananda says that Babaji, the ever-existing master or the ever-living master who retains his body, has taken on the role of guiding the spiritual unfoldment of mankind in this age. He and Jesus Christ, two avatars together, in concert, you might say, for East and West, help guide the spiritual evolution in this age. And so they incarnate from time to time. And here we find ourselves at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, at the beginning of this age of energy that has come out of this dark age of Kali, a time when man's consciousness was able only to perceive this reality in terms of physicality, of physical universe, in terms of matter. Now we've moved into this higher age of energy. And so it's very appropriate at this time that a new expression be brought into the world. And that expression is through these, as you can see it expressed in these teachings of self-realization. I think particularly through the life of Lahiri Mahashaya. I bring him up, I mentioned him because he was that disciple chosen by Babaji to disseminate these teachings of Kriya Yoga out into the world. And what was Lahiri Mahashaya? What stands out about him? He went up into the Himalayas and he received initiation from Babaji, and he wanted to stay. He didn't want to go back to his life as an accountant, his life as a householder. But Paramahansa or Babaji said, no, you must go back. You must go back and live that life because it's your destiny to play a particular role. We have entered into a new age. In past, these teachings were reserved for only those high souls who could renounce the world and dedicate their life one-pointedly, body, mind, and soul, to the quest for spiritual realization. But now we've entered into a new age, and Lahiri Mahashaya expressed that through his life of living a life which in outward appearances seemed to be a worldly life, working in an office. He had a family, children, and he carried on a householder of appearance of a normal householder outwardly, but inwardly he was free. And he set that example of showing how these teachings of Kriya Yoga, how these teachings of self-realization could be expressed in this modern age. It was not an age when mankind needed to renounce outwardly in an outward form, to retreat, you might say, from outer engagement. Rather, we need to retreat, if we want to use that word, not outwardly expressing, but we want to retreat inwardly, symbolically, or more than symbolic. We want to retreat spiritually from this engagement with outward sense attachments, and to express those in our life. And so in Dwapara Yuga, it's a time for bringing these teachings of self-realization, bringing these teachings of spirituality into the world and showing how they can apply in our everyday life. And Lahiri Mahashaya, so he was the channel that Babaji chose, and through him these teachings then express themselves through his many disciples, but particularly through Sri Yukteswar, who served the function of being the teacher and the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, whose destiny was to take these teachings out into the world. The avatar also comes to set an example. We need to have saints in this world. Without them, how would we know how to act? Krishna, in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, you'll remember, he said, whatever the superior being does, lesser beings imitate. And so the avatar comes to set that example. He comes to disseminate these teachings. And he sets the tone, you might say, for this age. One of the things I find very fascinating also about this topic is what I've just mentioned, that God intervenes in human affairs. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda said, and often gave a very interesting story of this, which I found quite remarkable. He was saying that in the time of the Second World War, that the masters implanted thoughts in the ether, you might say, or magnetically implanted thoughts that the leaders of the Axis powers, Hitler in particular, attuned to, took into their mind, that guided them to take certain directions. Now, it didn't force Hitler in that case to do certain things, but yet thoughts were implanted in the ether that through the influence of the great masters that then Hitler attracted. Now, Hitler had a certain magnetism, you see. He didn't have to take those thoughts. He didn't have to make that decision to do this maneuver or that maneuver, this strategy or that in the conduct of the war. But yet his magnetism was such they attracted negativity, or they attracted wrong thinking. He was not in tune with the divine will, and so he attracted those thoughts that took him in a direction ultimately which led to his defeat. Now, it's very interesting, and you can say, and Paramahansa Yogananda mentioned many other cases in his own past lives of the past of how he had incarnated in order to subtly guide the unfoldment of history in very little subtle ways. Now, why? Why would they do it? And again, it comes back to the question, why? Why not let it just unfold? Well, perhaps we can't answer ultimately the question of why, but I think it gives indication that there is a divine plan. In other words, there is a direction to history itself. There's a direction to spiritual evolution, that it's not simply random, as people might believe. And when I first came upon these teachings, that thought gave me great comfort. I had come from a very intellectual background, and as a college student, many young people are, they study, and scientific materialism being you might say, the religion of the scientific age, I tended to think in terms of life being random. There was no purpose to life. But as I began to study the teachings, and particularly this thought of the avatar, who takes an interest in the world, it gave me hope. It gave me hope that maybe there is a purpose to life. Maybe there is a direction. Maybe there's something that is in store for me. And I think that is true for each one of us. We each have our individual karma, but the common destiny for all of us is the same. It's for divine fulfillment. It's for divine union with God. And that although at times there's darkness in this world, there's chaos in this world, and many people read the newspaper, listen, or I don't know if people read the newspaper so much anymore, but certainly we look at the news on the internet and we can become discouraged. And yes, we have to be aware of what's going on in this world, and we have to do our part in the world, and we have to do the right thing as best as we know how to do it. But don't lose heart. Sometimes people, they become very discouraged. Everything's going downhill, things are bad. Well, yes and no. They are in one level, but we have to realize on a higher level there is a divine plan, and that we are particularly now, we're in an ascending age, and that each of us have our part to play, but we can do it as an instrument for the divine. Remember, the avatar comes as an instrument of the divine. But the avatar, the difference is the avatar is a free soul. He's not unique in the sense that he's in the sense of being different from us. Many people think of, in the West, say Jesus Christ as somebody very unique, and a unique manifestation that is beyond the potential of all of us devotees. The same for Krishna or Buddha. But yet we must remember that what they have done in their lifetime is an example and an inspiration of what we too could do. They didn't come for us to worship them, particularly as a personality. They came in order to inspire us to become like them. And so if we want to worship God, if we want to worship, you could say, an incarnation, if we want to worship our Guru, the best worship that we can give to God and to Guru is to purify ourselves, to become like them, to become one with them. One who is with God, is what Paramahansa Yogananda said. And this is the destiny of all of us. And you could say it's also the spiritual duty of all of us, is to be able to emulate. And that's the mission of the avatar, is to set a standard for humanity, age after age after age, to come again and again, so that we might have a model to be able to inspire us and to be able to raise ourselves up to. Now, I'd like to continue with a few other stanzas that follow that. Krishna, he said, whenever virtue declines, I incarnate again and again. And I'm going to skip a couple because I want to go forward, and I'll come back to these others later. And then in stanza 11, he says, O Arjuna Partha, in whatever way I am approached, in that way do I respond. All men, by whatever path, come to me. And I wanted to skip to that one because I mentioned how the avatar, God, manifests in every culture, I suspect, has a tradition of the divine appearing in a liberated soul, coming down to inspire them. And often, as the nature of humankind, we say, oh, my master, my form, my avatar is better than your master, and there's a sense of arguing that takes place, and there's no need for that. He says God comes to us in many different forms. In whatever way that we worship God, we come to God through that particular path. It's like a mountain. There's many paths leading to the top of that mountain. And the natural tendency is you find that religionists tend to argue with one another. I've noticed that some of the fiercest arguments are not between those who believe in God or believe in a spiritual path and those who don't. But it's the fiercest arguments are those who believe in God and somebody very close, perhaps slightly different form. No, that's not the way to do it. You're doing it all wrong. It's this way. It's those, you could say, those people that are very close to us, but slightly different. You find this in religions, different sects of the religion. They argue very fiercely one with another. They all go to God. It's the direction that people take that is the most important thing. If we think in terms of in what direction is another going, if a person is going toward what I'm going, but perhaps in a slightly different pathway, then he's with me. As sometimes is said, if so-and-so is not against me, he's with me. And I think this is a nice inclusive way to look at religion and to look at other people and beyond religion. Think in terms of inclusion. Think in terms of similarities, not in terms of differences. This is something Paramahansa Yogananda stressed. And you can apply this beyond religion. Don't define yourself if I'm different than this person, I'm different than that person. If your first impulse, and this marks an attitude of the spiritual person versus the worldly person, if your first impulse is to see what binds you to other people, what binds you to those with perhaps who are different than you, then you'll find that if you can find those similarities, you'll be able to find common ground. Whereas the worldly person tends to define themselves according to how they're different from other people. So I see a couple of questions coming in. Just tell me the question, and I'll. What is the question?
Okay. So one of the questions is, Krishna intervened in the war, and sometimes with unfair means, to help the Pandavas to win. But isn't it a conflict in Dharma by which the war was supposed to be fought?
Yes, this is a mystery, isn't it? Is Krishna? The question is, Krishna intervened. Krishna intervened in the battle, and he didn't necessarily do it. This is what the Pandavas even, they commented to Krishna, you've intervened, but you didn't do it by humanly considered righteous means. And we have to understand, was this right? Why did he intervene? And why did he do it in that way? And I think this is a mystery that you have to meditate upon, but you have to understand it on a deeper level. This world is tilted, and it's not a flat plane surface. And so consequently, is if you play, let's say, the game of billiards or pool, and pool table is very, very flat, but if it's slightly tilted, it will influence the ball in one direction. So it is with this world. The playing field of this world is for the life force, this creative force of cosmic creation, to go outward into manifestation, away from divine unity. That's the natural playing field in which we find ourselves. And so a person who's neutral and very much in the middle will generally over time begin to gravitate toward the natural tendency of going outward. This outward, if we didn't have that outward force, we wouldn't have this creation. And so this is why the effort to become spiritual, or the spiritual quest, is always referred to in spiritual tradition as an ascent. We go up the mountain, and going up the mountain as opposed to rolling down the mountain. And that takes effort. And so and this is what Krishna explains in the language of the story. He explains in the level playing field, if everyone was to play by the rules of this world, you would lose. You have to, the divine has to intercede and overrule at some point in order for you to eventually win. Now, this is something to take heart in, because we're not going to find God simply by being good, not doing anything bad, not offending any, making any wave in life. Now, I'm not saying not to be good, but what I'm saying is that's not enough. We have to make an effort, because just being good, and you might say on a low level of energy, slowly that energy dissipates. It's called entropy. And that energy begins to dissipate, and we find that we begin to sink. Now, it takes very little effort or no effort at all to sink, but it does take effort to rise. And this, in the sense of evolution, human evolution, this impulse If we think of the Bhagavad Gita as a story that's going on within us, we have to have this divine intercession, or the intercession of the higher self into the lower, to be able to make it arise. And so Krishna is illustrating this as, yes, by the outward rules of Dharma, they would have lost. So he interceded. God is not bound by the rules of his creation. He's not bound by the rule of natural law. If he was, he wouldn't be divine. He wouldn't be omnipotent. He wouldn't be omnipresent. He's beyond all of those binding forces because he has created. The divine has created, and all that takes place in this creation is subject to his grace, subject to his will. And so this story of Krishna, I recommend you go read that part of Krishna where he explains this after the battle. I don't have it at my fingertips, his exact arguments, but the argument is that he, the divine, who has created this whole show. He has created this whole show of the Kauravas. He's created the whole show of the Pandavas. They're all acting at his command. He's the conductor of everything. And the highest duty is not to see the play in the minute movements and gestures of the actors, but to step back and see the larger play and who is conducting it all. Good, bad, creation, destruction, all of it is part of God's show, and Krishna was the conductor and the orchestrator of it all. Let's come back. That's a good topic. Let's come back. We'll come back and discuss this further in future discussions. Many blessings to you, and I hope to see you again next week.